All right, hey folks, welcome back to part 2 of my Sheepshead tutorial. If you haven't seen part 1, please go watch that first. I'll put the link right here above. We talked about the Sheepshead in general, the rigs that I use, the tackle that I use, the bait, and how to rig the bait. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. In this one, we're going to talk about finding sheepshead, the techniques that I use for catching them, and pretty much anything I missed in the first video. All right, first, as far as finding the sheepshead, earlier in the other video we talked about they're always around structure, piers, jetties, in saltwater conditions or brackish water conditions. An effective way of finding them, of course, if you're in a kayak or in a boat, is you can use sonar. Now, the advancements in sonar have been pretty good over the past 10 years. And say if you're out scanning pylons in a kayak and you just have something as basic as like a hook 4 with just regular sonar, no down imaging or nothing like that, you can literally just pedal right beside the pylons, say at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and you'll see the full length of the pylon and the fish hanging off of it just as plain as day. Now keep in mind that's just a still image, but at least it'll tell you that there's a fish there. Now these are big sheepsheads, so trust me, you will see them on the sonar if they're there. Regular side scan, it's down scan seems to pick them up better for me than side scan. I just have had better luck with that. And then of course we have the Garmin Live Scope, which is ridiculous. I have it on my boat and my kayak. It makes it very easy to find fish, period. I can literally just pedal close to the pylons, put it in forward scan and shoot it out and sweep and scan all 3 pylons at the same time and literally see these fish swimming around that pylon live action. It's crazy. The depth they're at and everything. So I can just go right up there to it, drop it down to whatever depth they're at with the method that I use and catch them. I mean, it's really very simple, but you can do it with just regular traditional sonar as well. You just got to get closer to the pylon and kind of roll by it first and then come back to it if there's fish there. And when you do this, try not to bump the pylon. It's just common sense. You want to make as little noise as possible. Another thing as far as the fish biting I wanted to mention is if the water is very, very clear, I have noticed that sheepshead tend to be a lot more spooky. That's when maybe a smaller leader or more distance between the weight and the hook, or maybe even a different rig may help. Smaller hook that's hidden better within the crab body. I've been out in the bay where the water was clear and I could literally see 8 foot down on a pylon. Could not catch a sheepshead to save my tail. And I've been out there when it's opposite and the water's very murky and you can't keep them off your line. They'd seem to bite better in murky conditions to me. Also, another point that I want to add about finding them, I've typically had better luck finding them on the pylons when the current is flowing and it's rolling pretty good, because they don't want to sit there and swim in that current, honestly, any more than I really want to do in my kayak. They're going to get in that eddy behind that pylon. That's where they're going to be. The water's going to be flowing past these pylons, flowing around it. And right where it comes around it, there's going to be like a little swirl, we call it an eddy, of still, almost motionless water. And that extends all the way down the pylon. And that's where these sheepshead are going to be, because they can get right there in that little spot. They don't have to fight the current. They still have access to food, and they just sit there and chill until the current slows down and stops. And then a lot of times they'll kind of spread out a little bit. They swim around a lot more in between the pylons and stuff. So they're a little bit easier to catch when the current's flowing, what I'm saying. And I've actually seen situations out there where the current was flowing so strong that you can't hardly get to the pylons in these kayaks. I mean, you're pedaling as hard as you can to get up there. But if you can get up there and get it down back of that pylon, the odds of catching a sheephead are very good, because they're going to be right tight against that pylon. Now you got to get it right against it in these situations, because if it gets in that heavier current, it's just going to take it right away no matter how much weight you have. I mean, I've used as much as 5 ounces out there and still have the current take it away. In situations like that, you just kind of give up. Just wait, do something else until the current slows down. But anyway, moving water is better because it locates the fish on the pylons. All right, as far as my fishing technique, and I have to admit I learned this from my buddy Jim. He's taught me a lot of what I know about sheepshead fishing. I would use this bait caster typically, because I'm always fishing on the pylons typically for them, even though I've done some different fishing for them this year. But this is typically what I would be using with the flipping switch. 3 ounces of weight, sometimes 2 if the current's really soft. Fiddler crab on here, and I'm gonna get right up behind that pylon, whether I'm in a kayak or in a boat, as close as I can. Now the boat, I typically stay a little bit farther away from the pylon, because I truly feel that the large presence of that boat can definitely change how much they're willing to bite. It almost like spooks them a little bit. That's why I use these long rods in the boat, because I try to stay away from it using my trolling motor. You know, I can get up there beside these pilings, but it's definitely easier to catch them from a kayak. I'm just going to be honest with you. I backed the camera away from me a little bit so we can kind of see here, but I got my long jigging rod here. I'm gonna try to stay in frame. And what I would do is just go in to press the button to begin with, and I let about roughly 5 foot of line from the rod out. As you see, there's roughly about 5 foot right here from the tip. And I'll get right up behind that piling, and I'll get literally right in that eddy and start at 5 foot in depth. Just drop it right down to the tip of the rod real slow, and that's where I'll start. And after it sits at that spot for 10 or 15 seconds, what I'll do is just kind of like hold the rod down still, and I'll depress the button and kind of thumb it a little bit and like lift the rod real quick without letting the lure drop. And I'll bring out about another 5 feet of line, and then just slowly start working that down the piling. And I just continue that method. I know once my tip gets to the water that my lure is roughly at 10 feet. And I'll just continue right on down the back of the piling doing that. And the reason that I do that is so I can keep track at what depth that I'm at. That way, if I'm looking at them on the sonar and I see, you know, 3 of them down there at 25 feet, I can slowly work my way down to them. Now, I'll still fish the rest of the piling. I don't just drop to 25 feet, because you can catch fish on the way down that just didn't happen to be in that spot when you looked at it. And another reason that works very well is if you get a bite and you get your crab stolen, you're going to know at what depth you were at when you got that bite. So you can just reel it back up, throw another crab on it, get about 5 foot away from that depth using that method, and then just slowly drop that last little bit right back down to where your bait got stolen, and usually catch that fish that robbed you. That's pretty much the method that I use to catch these fish. Now, something that I started doing different this year, basically because of the live scope, because it's so good at spotting these fish, if I know that there's fish at 25 feet and I drop it down that piling and I slowly work through that zone and I let it sit there and I don't get a bite, I'll go right on down, 30, 35, and almost to the bottom. I usually try to stay off the bottom, because that's where you'll run into like croakers and stuff that'll just steal the crap out of your bait a lot of times. So normally once I fish that piling all the way down, I'm just gonna reel it up and move on to the next one. I literally will do it once on each piling and move on. But if I know there are fish there because I see them, and I'll go them down past that zone where I know they're at and they hadn't hit it, what I'll do is stop once I get to the bottom, and I'll slowly start cranking that reel back up. And my thought to this was that, okay, I sent this rig down, and basically these sheepshead are down there eating on this piling, and here comes this weight kind of like bobbing on down, and it might have spooked them a little bit. And they kind of like scurried away for a moment, and then here comes the crab, here just hanging like, oh God, help me. And it just went right on down, and by the time that fish kind of swam back around that piling to where they were, it's already past them. I was like, oh, well, let me try it. So what I did is started reeling it back up from the bottom. And what happens then is this is coming back up. Of course, this line is a lot less disturbance. And that crab is the first thing that comes up to that sheepshead. And Lord and behold, it worked. 2 of those citations that I caught in that last video, I caught using this method. I could see them down there, but every time I dropped it down, I wasn't getting anything. So I went all the way almost to the bottom and then slowly started working it back up, and I caught them. Now, some of you might be like, okay, well, why not just drop it all the way to the bottom and then start working it back up? Well, the thought behind that is if you do that, you're basically disturbing every fish on that piling as this sinker just comes plowing through going down, and it can spook them. Now, if you do it the other way where you slowly work down, you can pick up fish all the way down without disturbing the ones lower on the piling, and it works. I mean, I've caught fish at 15 feet, reeled them in, went back to that same piling, got down to 25 feet, caught another fish, to where if you just went up there and dropped it straight down, you take a good chance of spooking everything on that piling. So that's the reason we do the methodology that we do. It works. Now, a lot of times when the current is rolling really bad, I usually will just fish the outer piling the most, because it can be a little tricky, especially in a kayak, getting up to that middle and that first piling. Now, they hold them as well, but it's, like I said, it's just a little bit much sometimes, and I'll just work my way down the bridge fishing the outermost piling. Also, I want to go back to keeping track of depth as you're going down. Another reason for doing that is I've noticed that once you find sheephead at a certain depth, they kind of seem to be like that along the bridge within 10 feet or so. So if you don't have a live scope or something like that and you start catching sheepshead at 15 to 20 feet consistently, that's pretty much going to carry you across a lot of the bridge pylons. They seem to be at that depth pretty uniformly, so it can give you at least a hint of when you might be expecting a bite. As far as weight, once again, you want to use as little weight as possible just to be able to keep it by that pylon. Just makes it more sensitive. If you're in a boat, I just really don't think tying off to the pylons works so well, because once again, the presence of the boat, the commotion of doing the tying up and everything. Now, not saying you can't catch them like that. Of course you can. They have been caught like that plenty of times. If you have a trolling motor, you're better off trying to spotlight beside that pylon or close to it and fish it in that manner. Now keep in mind, these spotlights aren't completely reliable. I've had issues with mine kind of going haywire. I've rammed into a bridge once already. It's better to have somebody dedicated and manually controlling the motor, and you can keep the boat in much better position that way, which sucks because that one person usually can't fish because it's pretty busy keeping all those steady adjustments in to keep that boat in position. But if you take turns, it is more effective than trying to use spotlight. Also in a boat, I try to use the longest jigging rods that I can to keep, the boat as far away from the pylons. Naturally, if you're tied off, you're not going to be able to do this. You probably want shorter rods, but if there is any other way than tying off that you can get there and fish the pylons, that's definitely the way that I would try to do it. And most all other situations other than fishing pylons, you're going to be fishing structure like jetties, wrecks. You're going to be pretty much going to the bottom. Once again, I would just, if you're jigging a wreck, just drop it to the bottom and just try to keep from getting it snagged, kind of bump it along, give it some action. Bottom jigs work very well. These guys in those situations work well. If you're in a boat or a kayak and you're having hang-up issues, you can do the float setup like I mentioned before. That actually works very well. As far as fishing from like a pier or a dock or something like that, it's going to be very similar to fishing just pylons from a boat or kayak. You'll just kind of get up to that structure, drop it down beside it real slow, and hopefully catch something. Once again, if you're fishing from shore, the cork setup works really well, because otherwise you tend to get snagged a lot into whatever structure or jetty rocks that you're fishing out there. So learn how to do the float setup. It'll work. It'll at least give you the opportunity to catch them. All right, last but not least, the Bight, which is a very famous bite. The sheepshead are notorious for stealing your bait. They're so good at it, it's ridiculous. And that's a lot of times why they're called convict fish. But other than the stripes, it's a dual meaning, trust me. They can be very frustrating at first, and it did take me a while to get used to it and finally figure them out. The larger ones are actually easier because a lot of times they'll commit to a bite and they'll take it. It varies. I've had aggressive ones to where you feel it and the line starts moving and you go and you set the hook like you would a typical fish. A lot of times though, you'll be there at say 20 feet and you got the weight of this weight hanging on the end of your pole. You can feel it and you're right beside that pylon, and that fish comes up and says, "Oh, crab," and he grabs it and he actually starts chewing it and he picks that weight up for a second. And the fish are big enough that they do that and they don't really notice it. So you're up there and you got that weight suddenly just kind of eases off and goes away. That is a dead sign to swing, because most likely a sheepshead, a big sheepshead, has picked it up. Now, with that being said, you can be dropping this down beside a pylon, and those pylons are slanted, and you're up here at the top trying to stay behind it, and you'll get down, say, 20 feet, and you'll hit a little barnacle or a little oyster or something sticking off, and it'll give you that same feeling for a second as you're dropping it. Now, there's no way of knowing which it is, so I would just giving it a lift just to see if you feel any resistance back. And if you lift and you feel something, go ahead and finish the swing. Otherwise, just continue dropping it down. Now, if you got it just sitting there still, and all of a sudden that weight goes away, that's a fish. It's picked it up. Definitely swing at it. So that's one thing about the bites that I've noticed, is that it's not always a noticeable bite like you're used to with other fish. Sheepshead, they'll actually grab it and lift it for a second, and it's just getting used to that sensation. Once you feel it a few times, you'll know what I'm talking about, and it becomes much easier to catch them once you anticipate that. The little ones, they're aggravating. I ain't gonna lie around it. You gotta have the right size hook, even the right size bait at times. Sometimes these fiddler crabs we use are too big. I've actually halved them plenty of times to catch the smaller guys. And it's the same way, you just gotta have ninja reflexes on them. That's all there is to it. Just be ready, have that line tight, the rod low, ready to swing. pretty much it. And just keep practicing until you get them. You know, it's kind of funny too. I say all that because the old timers that I talked to always told me that you got to swing before he bites, which is of course ridiculous, but that's almost what it's like trying to catch these guys at times. Of course, once you get them hooked, you want to get them away from the structure. If you're in a kayak or a boat or something like that, try to just keep them directed away from running around the pilings and stuff. They will do that. They tend to dive down for the pilings because they want to get back to a cover. Just keep them away from it. If you're in a kayak, just back away from the pilings. If you're in a boat tied off, there ain't much you can do except maybe try to walk around the boat and pull them away from the pilings. If you're having issues with break-offs, you might want to upgrade the line weight and tackle size. That way you can get them up quicker. You lose sensitivity when you do this, but it's better than just losing the fish completely. It's a little more difficult to catch them, but at least when you do hook one, you can get it up and away from that structure quicker. All right, last but not least, once you get this fish to your boat or your kayak, and especially in a kayak, and you go to bring it in, especially the big ones, the spines on its back that stick up, you don't want any part of that. Trust me, those things are deadly. And when you go to grab them, they go stand straight up. I throw both of my legs off each side of the kayak once I bring them in until I'm done unhooking and handling them. You don't want to get spiked by one of these guys because it hurts. In a boat, same thing. Just be careful handling them. Typically, once you get them up to the boat, especially the big ones, they're pretty tired because they put in some pretty hard runs. You know, you'll get them up, you'll get them in, and get them unhooked. You know, a de-hooker works really good because you can kind of hold that line tight and slide down it and just pop that hook out. Pliers work as well. I've broke a lot more hooks off using pliers though. Once you get them unhooked, you can pick them up, basically just hold them like under the belly here and grab the tail is typically the way I always hold them. Keep in mind, he still can shake away. If they do to shake away, I kind of like let it go away from me, you know, versus trying to catch them. Because like I say, you don't want to take those spines in the hand or the arms or anywhere really, because they're deadly. And that's pretty much it. You know, if you caught a big one, congratulations, because these dudes are some fighting dudes. I do really suggest, just for conservation, the bigger guys, I'm talking, you know, 22, 24 inches and up, get your picture, you know, for Instagram, Facebook, your video like I get. Just be careful with the fish, handle it gingerly, and revive it and let the fish go. I mean, there's plenty of smaller ones out there that you can keep that are much better eating. These old ones, I mean, this fish is probably 20, maybe even older, 20, 25 years old. In my opinion, they're breeders. You know, you need to send them back out into the water, live their life, so these sheep stay here for years and years to come. When you go to put them back in the water, especially the big ones, a lot of times you got to help them out a little bit because they'll be kind of stunned, and you really got to get them in the water and kind of hold them, let them get some air. Sometimes you put them in and they'll just splash the heck out of you and go. Other times you really got to revive them. So before you just throw them in the water head first, watch him, make sure he goes down, because at least half of those big ones that I catch, I'll let them go and they'll turn belly up and start floating away with the current, and that fish is going to die if you don't help it. So if you have the ability, get to him, get him back inverted, get some water moving through his gills, and do everything you can to conserve that fish, because he earned his life just as much as we did. I know it sounds corny, but just give him the opportunity to live, so maybe somebody else can catch him in the future. So that's just my thoughts. I know a lot of you keep every one, and that's fine. That's your opinion. That's your right. But I do everything I can to conserve, and I'll keep what I need to eat, and I'll let the rest go. So anyway. All right, well, there you go, folks. That's pretty much everything that I have on Sheepshead. I know it's a lot. If I think of anything else that I missed, I'll add it into the description of the video. If you have anything yourself that you would like to add, please add it in the comments. I'm sure there's a lot of tricks and stuff out there that some of you have, and let's share them. You know, let's help everybody out. There are very good fish, very fun to catch, good fighting fish. At this point, there's plenty of them out there. And try these tips, get out there, give it a shot. It'll be frustrating at first, but once you figure it out, they are absolutely one of the funnest fish to catch, and they are delicious as well. So that's it. Peace out. See you in the next one.